Hi, so this is Kate Mills, and I wanted to take time today to sort of give my thoughts and kind of a response to some friends and family online, but that I truly love and respect their opinions, their intelligence, and we just, some of us are completely on different sides of the political spectrum. A few, it's more just like we align on several things, but very much out of alignment on certain issues. So I think it was just sort of building up, and it will become obvious why, that I wanted to kind of just say something, because going back and forth, I just don't have that time. But it's important enough for me because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. And I am only talking about, to be really clear, legitimate misunderstanding and talking over each other a little bit. I'm not talking about trolls who are just going to troll and just keep coming back with sound bites when you give them a piece of data that is irrefutable, and then they just want to say the same things that they heard on their cable news program or whatever. I'm not speaking to those people because I'm sure they're not listening to this anyway. So this is distinct. I think it's really worth the time to talk to those people, engage with those people in your community, family, that really show honest curiosity or concern towards a topic that differs from the way that you feel. Because if you don't, we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to stay angry and polar opposites. And if you believe this, then you must be for this. And that there's no good place for that to end up. So I would only take the time to do this for people that I love. And not only do I really want them to understand where I'm coming from, so I'm not misunderstood. I think that's where, like, part of my personality gets frustrated, upset, and a lot of times it comes out as anger when I am convinced I'm being misunderstood. And sometimes I'm not. Sometimes they just legitimately, they understand me and they think I'm wrong. But either way, I want to clear up any of that. And then I also want to welcome the same on the other side. Like, once I kind of say what I need to say about immigration, and specifically everything that has happened with this Renee Goods death in Minneapolis, that's where this has kind of all been sort of building. Now you would understand the timing of it. I want to hear back from the same people that I've kind of been able to get a little bit back and forth with, but we all have jobs and kids and we just don't have time to do that. And to be honest, it's always later in the evening when I have time to scroll and look at stuff, and it's probably not the best time to be putting stuff out there in the ether anyway. So I'm more clear-eyed now, and I've done some research, and I'm calm. So I'm going to start with specifically immigration in general. One of my friends has posted some, again, legitimate sort of like, please explain this to me. Why do people feel this way? And as a pretty I don't want to say the most liberal person, the most liberal person in my family for sure. Again, I'm from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, so that should tell you something. But yeah, let me just skip to, I tend to default on the immigration issue to, we just need to be humane the way that we treat all humans, because they're all humans and it doesn't matter where they come from. So one of the major misunderstandings when people go to their corners that I often hear is that liberals want open borders, and so they, we let more brown people in so they can vote for Democrats somehow, whatever. But so no, most of the people that I know, respect, politicians that I will vote for, very much feel that it is important to our security and just success as a country to know who's here and to have an organized process for people to come in. Having said that, our country, specifically America, it doesn't really fall as much as people think in this category of we let more people in than anybody else. We're more generous than anybody else. And we're also the only country that is so, just lets people come across without being accounted. Pretty much always when you start talking in those generalizations, you're mostly wrong. But specifically, I knew I'd heard it before, so I wanted to look it up. And all those statistics, it's, I think, really important to have context. So yes, America is by far the country who lets in the most immigrants, period, and just straightforward number. But in context, if you take it relative to our total population, which that's what really makes sense. If you're a home of 5 people and you're barely making it by on your paycheck, and you take in 3 foster children, that is one set of circumstances, which is very different from a very wealthy family with a single child that takes in 5 foster children, or even 10 for that matter. So I think we can all see, when given that the one family that has less and less space is being much more generous with their resources than the one that has a lot of money and a lot of space. So that family can very well go on and say, we take in more foster children than anybody else on our block. But you can see where that becomes a little misleading. And that is the case with the United States and other countries with similar GDPs, and when you take into account our population. So this has that we take in 14 to 15% of our total population in immigrants. That's legal. And Canada is 23, Australia is 30%, Germany's 18 to 19%. It says United Kingdom is like almost exactly what we are, 14 to 15%. So then when you're looking specifically at GDP, it says, so if you take US, Canada, Australia, Germany, and UK, we are all high income countries. The US has one of the largest GDPs, one of the strongest labor markets, and a high long-term demand for workers in specifically healthcare, construction, tech, agriculture, where there is a lot of immigrants that contribute to those parts of our economy. And yet Canada and Australia accept far more immigrants per capita each year than we do. Germany absorbed a massive refugee inflow relative to its population, even during times when it was going through economic strain. The US kept legal immigration at levels that were set decades ago, meaning it hasn't kept up with general population growth. It was not indexed to GDP or population growth or labor demand. So many economists will say we actually need to be legally figuring out a way to accept more immigrants, not less. And what has happened, certainly under this administration, is they're looking for ways to cut, and they have cut legal immigration. They've cut the amount of people that we were legally taking in from other countries for refugee status or whatever. So not getting into all that. But so to my friend about immigration, about why I think that it was posed as liberals seem to not look at the same argument as we do with abortion, as far as, if a woman chooses not to have an abortion, or chooses not to carry out her pregnancy and have an abortion because she doesn't have the means, things like that. So that liberals tend to take that standpoint with that issue, but then in immigration, we liberals tend to act like our country should have unlimited means and resources for these people. So that would be part of my response to that, that the impression is really not based on reality, that this, what's the word for, sort of a concept when you feel like there's only this much of the pie. And so if they come in, they're taking our part of the pie. That's really not how it works in the economy, because if the people we're letting in are filling in these jobs that are by large not being filled in, we don't even have the Americans to work them a lot of times, then they're actually growing our economy. And another thing I don't have time to get into, but it's also not true that they're not paying taxes, because even so, the legal ones are obviously paying taxes, but even the ones that have been here for 20 years and have children here and just never, were able to come out of the shadows and become legal citizens, they pay plenty of taxes if they aren't paying it in getting out of their paycheck. They're obviously paying all of our sales taxes. Everything they purchase in our country is going to our economy. So that's a little disingenuous too. Okay, so I think yes, now that's kind of the easy part. So as far as specific to this administration and getting into Renee Good, from what I see, the major core of the dispute that I have with my family and friends on how these ICE and CBP, Border Patrol, CBP officials are handling arrests, and sometimes not even arrests. They have nobody to actually arrest, as in potentially the case with Renee Good. I think we're still hopefully waiting on a lot of details of what that law enforcement operation was. So arrest is kind of using that term loosely. Arrests and just sort of missions into our cities. The way that they're handling them has never been done before. So I think we need to start with, when you're talking to somebody on my side that is absolutely outraged and appalled and out there protesting ICE and what they're doing in our towns and our cities, you have to start from a level playing field, meaning Trump administration. So again, it has nothing to do with us feeling that we should have wide open borders. What it has to do with is calling leaders out on lies and protecting people in our community and other communities that have not committed crimes. And again, if they're here illegally, that's only a civil offense. It's not even a criminal offense. So I think our HHS secretary has said that many times. They're already, if they're here illegally, they're already committed a crime, or it's, you get what I'm saying. It's not something that they would go to jail for, and it's certainly not violent. So let's just start with that. And then you can definitely look up from the very beginning of this administration, they have been shown to be absolutely unreliable and untrustworthy in the court of law at the way that they handle these situations. And it started out with that mass craziness where they just rounded up people with tattoos and accents and threw them on a plane to, was it El Salvador? A country that some of them never had been, a country that at least one from my home state. had a court order that he should not be deported to. Let's just start with that a judge gave an emergency order because it was clear with just the evidence that was kind of rushed into him by civil rights attorneys that this was not, there was no thought into this, there was no due process. They could not even prove, our government couldn't even prove that these people were who they said they were. And proof of that is that they sent women on this flight, and that horrific prison in El Salvador doesn't take women, so they had to be sent back. So just that episode, there's so many things with that episode that now there's actually been care given to good journalism. Thank God we still have some. And so many things just during that showed their absolute dishonesty. And dishonesty for what? Like, they really just want to be cruel to people. If you want to deport people, deport people. Obama did more than, he was called the deporter in chief. People, liberals, were upset at Obama for how many people he deported. He was good at it, apparently, better than Trump, because his numbers were higher than Trump's. You can look that up too. It's crazy, but true. And weirdly enough, we didn't see all of these people being ripped out of their cars and their homes in underwear, and helicopters landing on top of buildings for, I think it ended up being one arrest, or maybe two arrests. And those two ended up being non-violent. They had done no violent crimes. There was no gang members there. So what are we doing this for? What are you defending when you're saying that the main reason that you're for ICE and these enforcements in our cities is for law and order? But who's law and order? Because there's already been cases of American citizens having their constitutional rights violated. So where's their law and order? The men with the guns have all the power, and they're increasingly being put in our streets with, now it's been documented, 50% less training. They're recruiting people based on strategies that is identifying, they're like targeting people that enjoy the violence. Because if you come here, this is what you can get away with, because we're not under the same rules as your local police that have a lot more accountability. As far as our vice president is concerned, he misleadingly stated that ICE and federal agents have absolute immunity. Also a lie. But they do apparently have the qualified immunity, which, yes, I would never before giving taxpayer money to people that are paid to keep us safe, to people who refuse to identify themselves when asked and come armed. And again, having all the power in pretty much, 99% of their interactions with the public, they have all the power, and they come in mass. There's 12 of them to arrest a 76-year-old gardener that has 3 citizen sons that served in our military. There's, they've got that covered. So they have all this power, but we're supposed to believe that because they fear for their lives, they can keep themselves masked. So we, as citizens and even illegal immigrants, have no idea if we're being carjacked or trying to be taken into custody or arrested for something, because you don't get told what the crime you've committed is, what they're pulling you over for, or running at your car to try to immediately get you out of the car without announcing anything. that has never been the agreement between a democratic society and law enforcement, those tasked keeping order in our communities. In order to have successful law and order in a community, you have to have an overall trusting relationship between the citizenry and those that are paid to keep us safe. And when you demolish that trust by violating our rights, by lying to judges, by being caught by journalists in memos talking about how you're going to try to get out of due process, shuttling off people that you can't even prove who they are, what their names were, what crimes did they commit, where is your proof? For those of you who don't care about due process for these people, we don't have a democracy if we don't care about the rights of others in our community. It is in the Constitution that even illegal immigrants get right to due process, because exactly what happened with a man from Maryland just saying that he did this and he's a horrible person and you should thank us for getting him out of your community, sending him to a prison and not ever being able to prove what you say he did. That could happen to anybody. They could come and get me, and because there's been American citizens that have tried to tell them or prove to them, ask for the opportunity to prove to them that they're American citizens, and they say we don't care. This is on tape. This isn't my opinion. So I think it should be an easy thing for us to admit these people have violated the trust of the communities that they are said to be protecting. And it is clear from all of the people coming out in like sub-zero, like minus 20 degree wind chill weather, this isn't what Americans want. This isn't what most Americans want. They want safe borders and they want safe communities. And they don't want our men that don't think that they're accountable to us and having to tell you who they are and what branch of government, what organization, wherever they, and tell you what you did before trying to drag you out of your car or your house. There's been so many, just countless violations that are in court, and some have already been adjudicated and they've been found. ICE, CBP has been found to have violated people's rights. But it's a little late when you're drug out in front of cameras in your underwear when it's 10 degrees outside and turns out you're a citizen. It's a little late for apologies then. But what it's not late for is for us to never trust what you say and insist that you are going to be accountable to us. And if that means we are going to flood the streets where you are trying to keep doing this and keep violently invading these communities, when you can't show from your past practices, the LA, that you need to be able to show the amount of violence, criminals that you've saved us from, and that it couldn't be done without violating the rights of the rest of us. Because based on past administrations and the deportation of criminals, as well as, again, it's documented. Obama also deported people that their only violation, whatever, was being here illegally. They were not all violent criminals. So, but anyway, so having said that, I think that is where I go when I just hear people say they're officers and you need to obey without asking questions. You've lost that, because you are now the most violent part of, the most scary part of most of our communities. Many of these communities didn't have violence until ICE came in there. I think, oh, it might have been Minneapolis. Like, yeah, I think Renee Good's shooting was the first murder of the year. First killing of the year. So when you're going to charge at somebody and just immediately be yelling and swearing at them to get out of their vehicle because they are participating in a non-violent form of protest, no, you don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore. That's gone. Because again, I consider it the same thing as if a hooded man is just charging my car. A hooded group of men are charging my car with weapons, telling me to get out of my vehicle. How are you any different from a group of thugs? How do we know? All we know is what we've seen from you is a good amount of thuggery and just disdain for not just immigrants, disdain for us, disdain for any communities that don't want you there, that don't believe in what you're doing, that no longer believe that this is in all of our best interest. Okay, so as far as this specific ICE law enforcement, these numbers have been widely reported. Every time our Secretary of HHS, I've done too many, Homeland Security, our Secretary of Homeland Security goes on and talks about the, she hits record and talks about, what does she say, 70% of some people in detention were violent criminals. There is no outlet, there is no reliable source of data that shows that. DHS own stats show that 73, it's actually exactly the opposite. 73% of the people that ICE has detained have no criminal conviction. A large portion are held without convictions, and many have no even pending charges. So they're just being held. And again, these are parents of citizens. These are brothers and sisters of citizens. Just don't have any charges. Of those with convictions, so now we're dealing with, never doing math on camera, but we're dealing with maybe about 25% of their total arrest or detentions. 25% of the people they take in are shown to have actually committed a crime. And of those 25%, 5% are shown to have committed a violent crime. ICE arrests so that is separate. That's just detention. And then arrest, 30 to 40% of the arrest had criminal convictions, and only 7% of those were violent crimes. So again, they're lying over and over. Every time they're questioned about what they're doing and why they are dragging in Easton, we had a pastor taken. I've been in the community for decades. You know, why they're dragging pastors and grandparents and gardeners at Denny's. Every time they're pressed about why this isn't what you had promised. This isn't what Americans were, really fired up about. They just keep saying, well, we're the worst of the worst. We're just getting the worst and we're keeping you safe. That's a lie. So again, if you can always just start any debate with truth, that to me is key. You just can't keep using sound bites when they're based on lies. And then I think finally, yes, you're welcome, finally. On Renee Good specifically, to my knowledge, I don't know that any other video has come out of the moments before that from what I saw, that, an officer in the vehicle was, or ICE, whatever, was just got out and started charging towards her vehicle, yelling, "Get the F out." So I don't know if before that there was any sort of attempt to de-escalate or to announce themselves, because I also feel like if there was, we would have definitely gotten that video. So much of where people are coming down, I think, has got to do with what happened before the video. But if that is the only thing we ever have to go on, and again, I think the only video the government released was the one that they found to be apparently really exculpatory of the officer that shot her, calling her what I think was an effing bitch after he shot her. So, I mean, if that's what you consider exculpatory, then good luck with that. So the other thing I looked up is, general rules of, not engagement, because it's not military yet, but general principles as far as, like, in this exact situation. It is a very common form of protest to block traffic with your bodies, with cars, very common. And in these ICE sort of invasions and raids in different towns, that's exactly what citizens are doing for each other. If, for instance, they know that their neighbor down the street, whatever, needs to take their child to school, their American citizen child to school, and whether they know or not that their neighbor is here legally, they are banding together and just protecting their community members. And sometimes that's, clogging up the streets so ICE can't get through, so the mom can get her child to school, or can go to the grocery store, or go get medicine for the grandparents, whatever it is. So, yep, that's been a very common form of very nonviolent protest. But as I looked up, it's still illegal. If you're blocking traffic in the middle of a road, it's illegal. That's when a lot of civil rights protesters and things got arrested for doing that. So if you're going to do it, there is a decent chance that you're going to be arrested. But that is only supposed to happen after certain things occur. So what this says is, generally not appropriate for traffic blocking protests are firearms, meaning in the case of the law enforcement, the use of firearms to break up a traffic blocking protest, the use of deadly force, ramming the vehicles. So officers ramming the vehicles of the protesters that's blocking traffic, not considered appropriate. Shooting at or into vehicles that are blocking traffic in protest, not considered appropriate. Using force absent an immediate threat to your life. And I know that's where some dispute is. So where I go with that is under this special rule of vehicles when they are treated as dangerous instruments, which is why the policy states that officers are trained to avoid standing in front of or behind vehicles so they do not get injured, because it's unpredictable. If a vehicle begins to move, officers should disengage if possible. Use distance and barriers, not gunfire. It specifically says not gunfire. Shooting at vehicles is strongly discouraged in most policies because it rarely stops the car. It increases risk to bystanders because who else is in that car, or the car goes out of control, it can hit somebody else. That seems real. And courts scrutinize these incidents heavily of somebody firing into a vehicle. After action responsibilities, these are other parts of the checklist for law enforcement to be operating within their sort of guidelines on breaking up or arresting somebody who's blocking traffic as a form of protest. After action responsibilities, provide medical aid if needed. Do we all remember when the doctor tried to ask if he could help her and the officer said, I'm a doctor, and I think the response was, I don't effing care. So they actually prevented her from getting medical aid. The ambulances couldn't get to her because the ICE vehicles were clogging up the road. Document warnings, arrests, and force used. We've also seen where those documentations, including with George Floyd, if we don't have camera, those initial documentation, like his was a medical emergency, that they documented his death as a medical emergency. So you're supposed to document all your de-escalatory practices before it came to using force. Preserve body camera footage. That would have been helpful if he didn't have to use one of his hands to hold his cell phone and the other one to fire the gun at her. Maybe he could have had a little bit more control, but also if ICE is really worried about all their safety and how scary the public is to them because they have to stay masked, then maybe put on some body cam to make sure to catch all these scary people attacking you, and then you can have much better defense in court. Allow legal observers and press access. And then finally, what the courts repeatedly emphasize as the need for de-escalation. Courts evaluating protest policing look for clear warnings. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if we had that. I didn't hear a clear warning, which would look something like, well, just this whole list. Clear warning, time to comply, de-escalation attempts, something I really it does not appear that they're trained in. Proportional response to stopping traffic with your car in protest. So proportional response, it doesn't seem like that would be at all brandishing a weapon, like not having a weapon out at all. There's individual enforcement. I actually don't know what that means. Individualized enforcement. So I guess case by case. Absence of retaliatory or punitive intent. And that might be belied by the effing bitch comment after he shot her dead. That would be hard to say that you didn't have any retaliatory or punitive intent. So failure in any of these areas often leads to civil liability, consent decrees, injunctions. So I think, like anything, taken case by case basis, this is a case, as was the George Floyd case, as was many we've caught on camera, that you can say that we should all raise our children to obey law enforcement and comply, to be safe, to be respectful, and I do raise my kids that way. And you can also say that, again, we trust those tasked to keep us safe with certain bare minimal of training and responsibility to be the calm and mature ones in any interaction. So that means calmly speaking to the person that you need to get out of the car, or that you need to have her move her car so you can get through and arrest these dangerous criminals. But if any of that footage is out there of one of those officers saying, ma'am, I appreciate what you're doing, we need to get by, and if you don't, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have to take you in, have your car towed. No conversation. So if that footage is out there, please send it to me. But my family members that are in law enforcement are some of the most caring and honest people I know. I don't believe if they're being honest with themselves, they would ever have been in that situation that that cop was in, that ICE officer was in, because they would have talked to her like a human being to begin with, like somebody that could have been a mom. So no, I don't buy you comply at all costs, because compliance hasn't shown to work. They've still beat up people who have complied. They've tackled U.S. congressmen in press conferences, very well-known U.S. senator in press conferences. They don't care, and they don't care because their leaders, and God knows I use that term super loosely, have told them that they don't have to care, that they have immunity. And there's all sorts of reporting about memos that have come out. So, no, we don't just comply. And especially if we are white citizens that are generally can assume our safety when we walk around in streets, we should definitely be out there showing what our values are about, and that we're willing to stand up for people that may be here illegally, but they're also the caregivers of our patients. They also take care of our adult parents for years and years. They take care of our children. So no, I don't believe that you just comply. Thank you.